Lecture 11.3 is going to talk about the last part of the cardiovascular system chapter. This is going to be the blood vessels, arteries, veins, capillaries. The entire time that your blood circulates through your body, it's contained within a blood vessel. Blood vessels are any structure that transports blood around our body, and that's going to include arteries, veins, capillaries, and a couple of other structures. From the heart, blood enters the large arteries. The first one is the aorta, and then the arteries continue to branch. Blood then travels through smaller arteries. Eventually, the arteries branch into even smaller structures called arterioles, and those arterioles will branch into capillaries. So this is what we see here. Arteries always carry blood from the heart. When they branch into smaller pieces that lead to these capillary beds, those smaller structures are called arterioles. And then the capillaries are the thinnest structures. This is where gas exchange actually happens. As the capillaries reconverge, they form venules. So now we can see here that in this capillary bed we had oxygenated blood, and it has now transitioned over and become deoxygenated blood. This is because the gas exchange occurs at the capillaries. So once the capillaries have delivered the oxygen to the tissues and taken up carbon dioxide, they are going to merge together, forming a venule. And venules then merge together to form small veins, which merge together to form larger veins. The largest vein is the vena cava, which directly returns blood back to the heart. The walls of blood vessels have three different layers called tunics, and this is true for all of the vessels that we talked about on the last slide, except for capillaries. Capillaries have only one thin wall of epithelial tissue. This is conducive to gas exchange across those tissues. But arteries, veins, venules, arterioles all have these three layers. The inner layer, which lines the lumen, or the hollow center of the blood vessel, is called the tunica interna. This is simple squamous epithelium, and this gives the inside of the vessel a smooth surface for blood to travel through. The next layer is a tunica media, which is a layer made up of smooth muscle and elastic tissue, and the sympathetic nervous system can control this smooth muscle tissue and can either constrict or dilate the blood vessels depending on the needs of the body. Tunica externa is a layer of tough connective tissue, and this is for protection and support of the vessels. Okay, this picture kind of wraps together the two previous slides. We can see the path of blood, so from the heart, blood will be traveling through large arteries that have these three layers. Notice that in the largest arteries we have a thick tunica media. The walls of these vessels are very strong and stretchy to account for all of the pressure in the blood that's leaving the heart. These large arteries will branch into ever smaller arteries, which will then branch into the capillaries and the capillary beds. Notice here the capillary wall, again, is only the inner lining, is only the tunica interna. From the capillaries, blood is moved into small venules, small veins, large veins, and then back to the heart. Note in this picture the major difference we see between veins and arteries. Arteries are always carrying blood away from the heart. Veins are always carrying blood back towards the heart. Okay, so because arteries are closer to the heart, they're dealing with blood that's under high pressure, and they're also dealing with blood that's under continually changing pressure. So every time the heart beats, the pressure of the blood increases and then decreases. So because of this, it makes sense for arteries to be strong and to have stretchy walls so that they can accommodate that high and then low blood pressure. Over here we can see the veins have the same three layers, but the tunica media is much smaller, and the lumen, or the open space in the middle of the vein, is much larger. Veins are farther from the heart, so they have low pressure, and because of that, they require a few special adaptations to help blood actually move back up to the heart. Blood in veins is often traveling against gravity, so if you think about the veins in your legs, Blood is under low pressure, but it needs to travel upwards several feet to get back to your heart. A couple of things help with this. We've got these valves in the veins. These help to close behind any blood that's flown through them to prevent backflow. And then also, the muscular system helps move blood through the veins because your skeletal muscles surround the outside of the veins, and when you move your muscles, they help to sort of squeeze the veins and push blood back up towards the heart, kind of like squeezing a tube of toothpaste. Microcirculation is the name for the circulation that happens in the capillary beds. So we can take a closer look here and see the actual level of circulation that brings nutrients to the tissues. So a capillary bed is going to be found between an arteriole and a venule. And there will be two different types of capillaries. There's going to be the one main capillary in the middle called the vascular shunt. We also have these true capillaries, which are all of the branches and the network of capillaries outside the vascular shunt. And these help to increase the surface area of the capillaries so that the capillaries can be exchanging material with more tissues. Along the edge of the vascular shunt, we see these sphincter muscles. And a sphincter is a circular muscle. It can close off a tube when it contracts. If we have low blood pressure, your body will redirect blood away from the capillary beds, sending them directly through the vascular shunts, and this will increase the amount of blood that's in the veins and arteries. So this will increase blood pressure. This is a response of the sympathetic nervous system. Next, we're going to look at the gross anatomy of vessels. So in other words, the sort of map of blood vessels throughout the body. So the main artery that we need to talk about is the aorta. The aorta is the first artery that is leaving from the heart. So it's receiving a majority of blood that's being pumped out of the left ventricle. There are a couple of divisions of the aorta. So up top here we see a little loop known as the aortic arch. This aortic arch actually branches into a couple of really important arteries that serve the upper body. The aorta also continues down behind the heart, and the region here that's in the thoracic cavity is known as the thoracic aorta. Below the diaphragm here we can see the abdominal aorta. Arteries branching from the aortic arch are numbered here, the ones that I want you to know. And so here we can see again the aortic arch is number 1. From the aortic arch, 3 different blood vessels branch: the brachiocephalic, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. If we look here, we can see the aortic arch. I've numbered these circles in the order that the structures are listed over here on the left side. From the aortic arch, we have this first branch, the brachiocephalic artery. That's going to branch into 2 main subdivisions. The first is the right subclavian. Think about the bone, the clavicle. The subclavian is gotten its name because it's below the clavicle. Also, we have this branch here, the right common carotid artery. Next, branching from the aortic arch is the left common carotid, which moves up into the neck. The last branch off the aortic arch is the left subclavian, and both subclavian arteries will branch into vessels that serve the rest of the arm. So here we can see the first one, the axillary artery, which then becomes the brachial artery. Remember, axillary refers to this armpit region and brachial is the arm. And then we have the radial and the ulnar arteries that are near the radial and ulnar bones of the forearm. Moving down into the abdominal cavity, it becomes the abdominal aorta. And the abdominal aorta really branches into vessels that serve the trunk and legs. First, we have the celiac branch here, and the branches of the celiac are not shown, but it has 3 important branches: the gastric, which serves the stomach, the splenic, which serves the spleen, and the hepatic, which serves the liver. We've also got the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. I labeled those number 4. So number 4 here is the superior mesenteric, and 4 down here is the inferior mesenteric, and those are bringing blood to the intestines. Number 5 here, we have the renal artery, which brings blood to the kidneys, the gonadal artery, which brings blood to the gonads. And then the common iliac artery is this really large branch here. Remember that the ilium is the hip bone, so this is the common iliac artery. Common because it branches into multiple iliac arteries, and this is where they are joined together. So number 7 here, we have the right and left common iliac artery. The first branch we're going to look at is the internal versus the external iliac. The internal goes back into the pelvis, and that's number 8 here. The external continues down the leg. External iliac then branches into the femoral artery, which, remember, the bone of the thigh is the femur, the popliteal artery, and that means the knee region, and then the tibial artery, which is that front bone of the shin, the tibia. Next, we'll look at the veins. And there is, again, one major blood vessel in this category. So for veins, the major blood vessel is the vena cava. Unlike arteries, veins are all bringing blood back to the heart. So rather than vena cava branching out into smaller vessels, it's actually formed by smaller vessels converging into larger vessels. So the vena cava is the final convergence of all of the veins before they enter the heart. Once they do merge together, they're going to bring blood into the right atrium of the heart. This large vessel here is the superior vena cava. This is the vessel that collects blood from all of the veins of the head and arms. And then we've got the inferior vena cava, which is bringing together blood from the legs and trunk and returning that blood to the heart. Okay, so here's a closer look. The superior vena cava is heading directly into the right atrium. The major vein that contributes to the superior vena cava is the brachiocephalic vein. The brachiocephalic vein collects blood from the arm, which, remember, brachio is the arm region, and blood from the head, which is what cephalic means. 3 main veins drain into the brachiocephalic. The first is the internal jugular. The internal jugular vein is bringing blood down from the head and neck. Next is the vertebral vein, which is, again, bringing blood down from the neck. It's this small vein in between the internal and external jugulars, which is why I put a little asterisk here. It's not numbered on the picture, but it's this little thin vein here. And then the subclavian is the other main vein that branches from the brachiocephalic. Subclavian, just like the artery, is below the clavicle, and it's going to branch out and serve primarily the arm. One branch from the subclavian is the external jugular, and that goes up into the neck and head, lateral to the internal jugular. The rest of the arm veins that we're going to look at are the same as the arteries. So we've got the subclavian branching into the axillary at the armpit here, the brachial, and then the radial and ulnar veins. The inferior vena cava is this whole long trunk here that's bringing blood from the limbs and trunk back up to the heart. I've numbered them from superior to inferior, although really the blood would be starting out down in the legs and being pulled upwards towards the heart. So I'm going to describe the path of blood in the direction that it's actually flowing. So down here in the leg we have the tibial vein. It's collecting blood from the foot and the lower leg. The popliteal vein is in the knee area, and both of those are bringing blood up to the femoral vein in the thigh. So these veins together are going to be returning blood to the external iliac, which is number 6 here. The internal iliac, just like the internal iliac artery, is serving the pelvic region here, and the external and internal iliac veins will combine at the common iliac vein. From the common iliac vein, we can follow the inferior vena cava up, and we can see that the renal veins are going to be emptying blood in from the kidneys, and the hepatic veins are going to be emptying blood in from the liver, and then that blood is going to continue on into the right atrium of the heart. It's important that you can label these veins on a diagram. It's also important that you can explain what regions they serve. There are several veins and arteries labeled in your textbook that I did not go into, and those are not going to be on the test. So these ones that I've labeled as arteries to know and veins to know are going to be the ones that you're responsible for.